here. This is in South Carolina. There's a removal hearing for South Carolina Treasurer Curtis Loftis. Now, the hearing of South Carolina Treasurer Curtis Loftis started at noon. So we wanted to go back to the beginning of it. It's still underway, but we wanted to go back to the beginning of this hearing and bring that to you. So let's listen in.
Motion is that the Senate resolve in the committee of the whole. All those in favor would please say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate will resolve. The committee of the whole will come to order. Pursuant to the sense of the Senate adopted by the Senate, in accordance with Article 3, Section 13, the Senate now meets as a committee of the whole for the purpose of conducting an Article 15, Section 3 hearing to determine whether State Treasurer Curtis Loftis should be removed from office. I want to remind everyone that this is a serious constitutional hearing involving the possible removal of a statewide elected official. The gravity of this matter cannot be overstated. It deserves and will require the full attention, care, and deliberation of each member of this body. To maintain the integrity of the process and the dignity of this chamber, I also must make it clear that the quorum is not merely requested, it is expected and will be demanded. No expressions of approval or disapproval are permitted from the floor or the gallery. Applause, verbal reactions, gestures, or disruptions of any kind are not in keeping with the gravity of this hearing. This is an important constitutional proceeding. I will ask all present to govern themselves accordingly. Pursuant to the sense of the Senate, I now recognize the Senate presenters for up to 1.5 hours. Senator from Berkeley, Senator Grooms, what purpose do you rise?
Be recognized to present.
You're recognized. We'll start at 12:12. Senator from Berkeley, Senator Grooms.
Members of the Senate, I really don't want to be here today. I know you don't want to be here either. My life would have been a whole lot easier if I'd just looked the other way. If the subcommittee had just looked the other way. If the Senate had just looked the other way. But that's not what happened. This is not a trial. I'm not a lawyer. You are not a juror. You are senators at a constitutional Section 3 removal hearing. The plain language of Section 3 reads, "For any willful neglect of duty or other reasonable cause which shall not be sufficient ground for impeachment, the governor shall remove any executive or judicial officer on the address of 2/3 of each house of the General Assembly." There will be no verdict of guilty. There will be no verdict of not guilty. There will not be an acquittal. But the ayes and nays will be taken based on your opinions on whether or not Treasurer Curtis Loftis is responsible for any willful neglect or other reasonable cause. This is the standard that each of us must base our opinions on today. Any willful neglect or other reasonable cause. Willful is defined by Webster's as intentional or deliberate. Neglect means to leave undone, unattended to, especially through carelessness. Another definition simply reads to disregard. And the meaning of other reasonable cause? A sufficient reason, having a good reason. Any willful neglect or other reasonable cause, easily understood. It's not complicated. That is our standard. That is our Section 3 constitutional standard that we base our opinions on today. Now, some may try to tell you that it should be a more legal and complex standard. They would be wrong. Again, this is not a trial. I'm not a lawyer. You're not a juror. I am, however, chairman of the Constitutional Subcommittee, and we conduct annual budget reviews and invite the financial executives to testify about their agencies and make budget requests. In January of 2023, at one of these hearings, Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom lit the fuse when he tried to explain away a $3.5 billion restatement that he had posted in the 2022 ACFR. The ACFR is our state's annual comprehensive financial report. The easy thing that day would have been to simply agree with him that a multi-billion-dollar error is fine, it's okay, we're just the government. It's no biggie. But what is the point of conducting a hearing if we simply ignore misfeasance and wrongdoing when it's uncovered? Why look for waste, fraud, and abuse if we never do anything about it, never hold anyone accountable for their failures? But we did our duty because we asked the hard questions and fervently sought to discover the truth. We did those hard things. We did the right things, and we're here today, and there is still just one more hard thing left to do. The subcommittee conducted 11 public hearings representing 27 and a half hours of recorded testimony. Among others, we heard from the treasurer, the comptroller, the interim comptroller, the state auditor, the interim auditor, the auditing firm Clifton Larson Allen, the accounting consulting firm of Malden and Jenkins, and the internationally known forensic accounting group ALEC Partners. Senate staff has worked hundreds of long hours, including holidays and weekends, and we've received, sorted, and researched thousands upon thousands of pages of documents. The subcommittee has now published 3 highly researched and fully documented reports revealing the causes and recommended remedies to the multi-billion-dollar problems we find in our accounting reporting and in our treasury books. We identified 3 financial executives most responsible for the multi-billion-dollar mistakes: Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom and State Auditor George Kennedy have both taken responsibility for their parts and did the honorable thing by resigning their positions. Treasurer Loftis, however, remains defiant and refuses to take responsibility for his failures. When I was first elected years ago, there was a group of freshman legislators from across the country that went to Washington, D.C. And while we were there, we heard a comic. And the guy had us all rolling in the first few minutes with a few jokes. And one of those jokes was, remember in politics, remember now, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it's how you place the blame. You know, and everybody laughed and got a good kick out of that. And then it got quiet for a moment. And then he told us to beware and never forget that there are those who will say anything and do anything to project their failures onto someone else, to project their failures onto you. Don't let them get away with it. And that has stuck with me ever since. Treasurer Loftis has had a big secret he didn't want anybody to know about. And I'll bet the farm that over the past 8 years, he's had a lot of restless nights worrying that that secret would get out, that that secret would one day be exposed. Such exposure would certainly destroy his self-image and peel back that paper-thin veneer of competence and righteousness he so proudly cloaks himself in. You see, Curtis Loftis had taken an oath to discharge the duties of office as state treasurer, and the main duty, the primary duty, the main reason we have a state treasurer is to maintain accurate and complete records of the Treasury. But doing so requires proper reconciliations of cash and investments that he has not done or cannot do. In 2012, 2013, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, the state auditor cited the state treasurer's office for significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, all related to incomplete or improper reconciliations of cash and investments. And in one report, the state auditor writes, it is probable that the magnitude of the difference in future years will have a material effect on the state's financial systems, on the state's financial statements. The outside independent firms of Malden and Jenkins and Alex Partners also report that the Treasurer's Office does not perform proper reconciliations. It is an undisputable fact that today the Treasury books are not accurate, they are not complete. And the big secret of Treasurer Loftis, the one that he's kept hidden away, is that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in errors in the Treasury books today, and he doesn't know how to fix them. The existence of these errors is also confirmed by Alex Partners. It is a fact that his errors have ballooned into multi-billion-dollar problems that are so great that they impair his ability to recognize what money is real and what money is not real. Under oath, he testified that a fund containing a balance of $1.8 billion was real money. So real, in fact, that he had earned $225 million in interest on that money. A year later, because of Alex Partners' forensic audit, we now know that that money was not real and that Treasurer Loftis could not have earned $225 million on money that does not exist. All this in direct contradiction to the under oath sworn testimony of Treasurer Loftis. There's lots of banks that the money flows in and out, real money. But in order to try to make the books balance, you have to add in fake money, money that does not exist. You take real money, you add and subtract fake money, and all of a sudden you get a balance. I'm going to tell you, there are real serious issues anytime anyone has to add funny money to real money to balance their checkbook. If the treasurer does not know if money is real, he doesn't need to be treasurer. Because of his failures, the self-proclaimed best friend of the taxpayer is costing the taxpayers tens of millions in legal, auditing, and oversight fees. And these costs to the taxpayer are just beginning. With friends like this, who needs tax and spend liberals? For Treasurer Loftis, concealing his secret, protecting his public image was much more important than faithfully executing the duties of office of state treasurer. The Curtis Loftis you see here today is not the Curtis Loftis we elected back in 2022. Back then, he appeared competent and trustworthy. Now that he's been outed, now that his secret's exposed, now that sunlight is shining upon him and his failures, he is a different person. This Curtis Loftis is high risk and unstable. This Curtis Loftis threatened and attempted to expose the bank account architecture of the Treasury in a manner that would have invited cyber thieves to empty the Treasury. This Curtis Loftis has engaged in a campaign of misdirection, blame shifting, and deception. This Curtis Loftis will say anything and do anything to keep others from looking at him and his failures. This Curtis Loftis is a liability to the finances of our state. This Curtis Loftis has broken the public trust, violated his oath of office, has willfully neglected the duties of his office. At this time, I'll yield the floor to the senator from Georgetown.
Senator from Georgetown, Senator Goldfinch is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I commence my remarks, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent for the screens to be lowered so we can see evidence.
without objection. That's already been covered.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking a lot lately, as you can imagine. I am going to be eating a cough drop as we're going through this argument. I hope you will forgive me if I'm smacking and eating this cough drop. I'll try not to be rude with it. Otherwise, I'm afraid my voice may go out. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, today we face a historic moment in South Carolina. As the chairman of the subcommittee said, it's a very regrettable but historic moment. No one at this table, on our subcommittee, or in this chamber relishes the idea of today. We all face this day with sadness and frustration that we even have to be here. But I have seen this body face incredible challenges and rise to the occasion. Just when I begin to doubt, the Senate comes together as one body, united in purpose for the betterment of South Carolina, and we solve the problem. That's what we do. That's what you do. And today, although it is historic, it's no different. Your constitutional duty, your duty here today is oversight, and I have faith that you will do your duty. The senator from Berkeley read to you the constitutional provision, so I won't read it to you again, but I will tell you that this provision was last used in 1875, and the journal from that session is instructive as to what we are considering today. I'd like to read you that, if I could, from Senator Swales, whose portrait sits right there in this chamber. The intention of the Constitution appears to your committee to be beyond doubt. When an executive officer has been guilty of grave crimes and misdemeanors, the Constitution, on one hand, arms the legislature with a powerful weapon of impeachment. But the framers of the Constitution have provided that where 2/3 of both houses of the General Assembly find in official character of such an officer sufficient evidence of his incompetency or his unfitness for the discharge of his duties, it shall be their duty so to declare and to require his removal. Now, in briefer and simpler terms, the Constitution has given 2/3 of both houses of the General Assembly the right to remove an executive officer by vote of want of confidence. Now, interestingly, that proceeding also involved a state treasurer back in 1875, but the question was summed up as this: the only issue made by the address is whether, in the opinion of 2/3 of the General Assembly, with the information before them, it is safe and proper to trust the administration of the state treasury in the hands of such an officer as the state treasurer has proved himself to be. This defines the core question the General Assembly must answer: whether the officer's performance justifies continued trust in their role based on available evidence. It focuses on the practical implications for the state rather than legal culpability, encapsulating the purpose of removal by address as a safeguard for public welfare. Ladies and gentlemen, today you see the fulfillment and the manifestation of our constitutional provision, this constitutional provision. You will hear evidence which details the many examples of willful neglect of duty or other reasonable cause. You will hear the treasurer either knew or should have known about the $1.8 billion error as far back as 2017. You will hear the treasurer's own words that the $1.8 billion actually existed, that he could get it in cash, that he had done a yeoman's work in earning, I've heard 170, I've heard 190, I've heard 225, and I've heard $250 million in interest over the course of the last year. You'll hear the treasurer's own words that the General Assembly spent that interest. And then you'll hear the treasurer's own words that he never said any of that. You'll hear threats from the treasurer's own mouth that he intended on releasing some of our state's most private and sensitive data online, on the internet. You'll hear from our former colleague who's here with us today. Thank you for being here, Senator. Senator McElveen say, I'm not giving you those instructions. And you'll see the letter from the treasurer where he told the Senate that the data was going to be released at noon that day on April 4th, 2024. Now, some of you may have sat on a jury before, or maybe you just watched a lot of Law and Order, and you may be asking yourself, what's the standard here? What's the burden of proof? Should I be judging this evidence based on reasonable cause, on reasonable doubt, which is a very tough standard for the prosecution, or maybe it should be by clear and convincing evidence or a preponderance of the evidence, which is more like getting to the 51-yard line than the 90-yard line? But all of those are wrong because this is not a criminal case. There is no jail time here. And this is not a civil case either. If the treasurer is found responsible under the law here today, he doesn't owe the taxpayers anything, regardless of what he's cost us. And let's not fool ourselves, that's been a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars, and will continue to be millions and millions of dollars in legal fees and oversight fees and auditing fees. The standard by which I suggest you hold the treasurer accountable is if he committed any willful neglect or other reasonable cause. And I'll suggest you weigh this evidence based on your experience. In your experience as a senator, in your experience as a businessman or businesswoman, in your experience just as a human being, does this make sense to you? Who do you believe? What does your gut tell you? I believe that you will conclude, after hearing all the evidence, that your gut will tell you, our treasurer, that man sitting right there, is a liar. He's a liar that was so concerned with his public appearance that he would do and say anything to cover up this mistake. And ladies and gentlemen, as you know, it's not the mistake that gets you in trouble. It's the cover-up. It's the lies, the irrational and hasty decisions and statements that cause a loss of trust. It's the ego and the pride of the treasurer that ultimately landed us here today. And as you know, pride comes before the fall. And very soon you'll hear evidence from some very talented lawyers sitting right there. They're going to tell you that the treasurer didn't know anything about this probably until 2023. They'll tell you that this was the Comptroller General's fault. They may even blame this on the treasurer's staff. But don't confuse their very clever arguments with the treasurer's defense. The treasurer's defense was very clearly articulated in the Post and Courier on April 8th. He said that this was nothing more than a shameless power grab to control the taxpayers' money, dressed up as concern for the public. He called you, a bunch of partisan hacks, and said this process was a farce. He called you, self-serving politicians who want to squander the people's money on insider deals and political ambitions. His defense isn't substantive, ladies and gentlemen. It's to attack you. His defense is to attack you. It's to claim martyrdom. Don't let him get away with that. He needs to be held responsible for his actions. You need to hold him responsible for your constituents, for the future of state government, and for posterity. Now, here at the outset of this hearing, I want to briefly review with you the statutes that we are going to be citing throughout our presentation. The statutes that outline the treasurer's duties are uncomplicated. They're clear, they're relatively easy to understand. These statutes are largely about keeping accurate records and reporting to others the status of the state's treasury. Thank you very much. They're written in plain, simple English, but yet they have not been followed by the treasurer. The neglect of these duties form the grounds on which I believe the General Assembly is compelled by the Constitution to remove the treasurer from office. If we could put up Exhibit 1A, please. I think we've provided the body with an exhibit packet to follow along, so if you're looking at that, it's Exhibit 1A. I'm not going to read you verbatim the statutes because that'll take a little while, so I'm just going to quickly summarize them if you'll allow me to do that. 11.5.100. He must create a separate account in his records for each appropriation to ensure that we can see the money allocated and how it's used clearly and accurately. 11.5.120. He must publish quarterly reports accessible to the public showing the amount of money available and when it's deposited and which fund it belongs to. He must submit a detailed monthly report to the Comptroller General on cash transactions in the Treasury with every amount, every payee, every source, and every use, and provide the CG with accurate cash balance statements and certified information about state revenue and finances whenever the CG requests it. 11.5.220, after selling general obligation bonds or anticipation notes, he must immediately report to JBRC, HWM, and SFC on the total amount sold, the interest rate, the repayment timeline, and the schedule for paying off the principal. And 11.5.185, which you will hear me reference a lot, he must submit an annual report to the General Assembly covering these things: total state revenue, amount of that revenue placed in the general fund, where the general fund money is held at the end of the last fiscal year, interest earned and how it was used, money spent on debt payments, current status of the general fund reserve, including any spending or repayments, and this is 11.5.185, Section 7, subsection 7. This you'll be hearing me reference a lot. Other relevant revenue details, like special state funds or highway funds that the treasurer finds important. The General Assembly will cover the cost of preparing this report in the annual budget. As you look through these code sections, please notice the frequency of the word report. This previews a recurring theme in our hearing. The treasurer is charged to be transparent with the public and the General Assembly. The treasurer has not been transparent with the public or the General Assembly. We're going to present evidence about how he was willfully neglected, how he has willfully neglected the duties described in these statutes, warranting removal under Section 3 of the Article 15, Section 3 of the South Carolina Constitution. Now, of equal significance, perhaps even greater significance than those statutory duties, is what you'll find to be the implicit duty of the treasurer, which is a fiduciary duty, a fiduciary of the state's funds. That requires that he take care of the taxpayer money, that he doesn't risk its loss, that he doesn't cause unnecessary or excess cost to the people of the state of South Carolina. This is so fundamental to the office. We're going to discuss this duty several times with you today, and we believe you'll find that this breach constitutes other reasonable cause for removing the treasurer from office. Now, as we move through these materials, please keep in mind the core question at hand, and this is the core question at hand: whether the treasurer's performance in office justifies your continued trust and confidence in his role based on the information you're presented here today. Now, we may have many long-term, truly years-long issues in the Treasurer's office to discuss with you today, but we're going to start with a more current event, which I believe will quickly introduce you to the risk posed if this state treasurer stays in office. Our state, like many states, receives significant funding from the federal government. To blunt the effects of the COVID pandemic, we received significant funding from the federal government. And one of those pots of money was the Housing Relief Fund, which you may recall was financial assistance for homeowners for mortgage payments, homeowners insurance, utility costs, among other housing-related expenses. The goal was to prevent mortgage delinquencies, defaults, foreclosures, and other housing-related issues. There was an error in setting up this fund. Excuse me. The funds should have been established to retain its own interest, as likely should be the case with all federal funds, unless specifically exempted by federal statute or regulation. The funds are always subject to either the provisions of the Cash Management Improvement Act, the administration of which is the responsibility of the state treasurer's office, or other federal regulations. We have a copy of this federal regulation, which, if you could please put up on the screen, which is, I think, Exhibit 2A. This should also be in your exhibit packet. Thank you. Interest earned amounts up to $500 per year may be retained by the non-federal entity. Any additional interest earned, federal advance payments deposited in interest-bearing accounts must be remitted annually to the Department of Health and Human Services Payment Management System. Now, as we contemplate the federal provision, let's keep in mind the treasurer also had a statute. He's governed by a state statute mandating that he provide.
You're watching Live Impact News on WCNC Plus. I'm Nick Sturtevant. Right now you're watching as there is a hearing taking place. This is not live. We backtracked it a little bit. We rewound it a little bit just so you can catch up in case you missed it. But the Senate, South Carolina Senate, holding a hearing now on whether to remove South Carolina's treasurer from office. This hearing comes after $1.8 billion in an accounting error was discovered. So we're listening live, and that on the top right of your screen is live. That's a scene at Orlando International Airport after a Delta Airlines flight was engulfed in flames. We had video earlier that we showed of smoke coming from the plane and passengers having to be evacuated through the emergency exits. We're told, luckily, and this is good news, no injuries have been reported, but that is still the scene at Orlando International Airport of that plane that was engulfed in flames. And right there on the bottom, news that is shaking the world today. Pope Francis passed away this morning at the age of 88. Crowds continue to gather at Vatican City, St. Peter's Square. You see right there is a ceremony happening right now, a death of Pope Francis rosary that's taking place there and in Vatican City, but so many people there to pay their respects for the late Pope Francis. He was 88 years old. All right, we want to get you back now to the hearing that is taking place today. Again, we wanted to start it from the very beginning so you could catch up in case you missed it. Again, this hearing concerns the removal of South Carolina Treasurer Curtis Loftis from office. Let's take a listen in.
Legislative staffers in September of last year asking if they could convince the treasurer to move the money for repayment. And here's the letter they wrote to Quentin Hawkins, Meredith Ross, and Trey Walker, which none of them, by the way, have any authority over the treasurer or the funds. If you could please put up Exhibit 2D. And for further reference, this topic is discussed in our report on page 47 of the exhibit packet, beginning on page 603. Now, this is a two-page letter, so if you've got it on the second page. Thank you very much. Even though this return of earned interest is something that is regularly done by the treasurer, this time he refused to do so. Over the course of budget deliberations, the chairman of Natural Resources Subcommittee, the senator from Beaufort, learned about the bond that our housing agency was was in due to the refusal of the treasurer and tried to help set things right. Ultimately, it took the issuance of an attorney general's opinion to force the treasurer to do his job. Let's put up that letter. That's Exhibit 2E, please. Please notice the date of this letter, March 31st, 2025. I'd like to draw your attention to the highlighted portion there at the conclusion. Thank you. According to Senator Davis and Senator Bufort's letter, this is a matter of extreme urgency. If the funds in question are not returned immediately, which is the ministerial duty to do, the state will be disgorged of millions upon millions of dollars at a tremendous cost to the taxpayers. Thus, based upon the ministerial duty to pay the monies in question, we strongly recommend you do. It is our hope that we are now back in compliance. But we are not yet certain of that, ladies and gentlemen. We know that the funds were placed in the incorrect account during the work from home days of COVID. We know that. But that was not the barrier to legal compliance the treasurer claimed it to be. He was charged with reporting to us matters of interest. But we heard about his noncompliance with federal law, not from him, not from his staff, but from housing. He has a fiduciary duty to custody funds with care, but it took an attorney general opinion that essentially said, do your job, Mr. Treasurer, before he would do it. He risked the state's loss of hundreds of millions of dollars, likely just to prove a point, because of the investigation of this body. He apparently didn't consider the millions upon millions of dollars that he almost cost us, so he never reported it. And this instance is just one more example of why the state cannot afford to have that man continue on as your treasurer. It's remarkable also that the process of remitting funds back to the U.S. Treasury did not even begin until after the Attorney General's letter was sent, but also after the adoption of the sense of the Senate setting the date for today for the removal of the treasurer. The fundamental duty of the treasurer is to keep accurate books. And the AlixPartners report left no doubt that his failure to do so is at the root of the $1.8 billion problem. The treasurer consistently asserts that his financial records are flawless. In fact, I've heard him say multiple times, my books are perfect, and that no issues exist in the Treasury. The treasurer even claimed, falsely, but claimed that AlixPartners validated his records were perfect and that they were kept. But the firm refuted this in writing and in person, making a second special trip to the state to clarify what their report actually said. You'll see in this video that the experts speak specifically to the degree of detail in accounting that the treasurer had the treasurer not neglected his duty, as we all know, would have revealed the errors had he done it correctly. Please pull up Exhibit 3A. The complete transcript of this video is in the final report, page 37.
You're watching Live Impact News on WCNC Plus. I'm Nick Sertivant.